Good evening and welcome to the Modise Network. Tonight, Reserve Bank Governor Lesetja Kganyago joins me on the couch as we take a look at the state of financial institutions and the banking sector in South Africa. Later on, the recently appointed UCT Vice Chancellor Professor Mamokgethi Phakeng takes stock of the state of higher education in the country. She also shares her views on how best we can transform the sector for all. I'm Tim Modise, and thank you for joining me this evening. Tonight, we focus on the function and distribution of money in the South African economy. The Reserve Bank plays the role of regulator. South Africa has a sophisticated economy, which is linked to the global system. With fuel and food price increases, tax increases, the currency depreciation, and other factors affecting the economy negatively, how does the South African Reserve Bank maintain the value and flow of our currency? The man at the helm is Lesetja Kganyago, and he is joining me on the couch this evening. Governor, pleasure to have you with us, and we appreciate your time.
Good evening, Tim.
Now, one question that we never really ask, or at least I have not asked, but I'm curious about it. I've had people ask, how much money is floating around in the South African economy at this time? Money as in currency.
When you mean physical notes and coins?
That's it, yes.
It's just about 120 billion rands. But that money turns itself so many times because you go into a store, you purchase, the store takes the money, deposits it in the bank, somebody withdraws it from the bank, and then the money is spent again, and it just keeps on circulating like that.
And that would be in terms of the currency, the notes and the coins, as you say. But when we talk money, we also talk about what is happening in terms of the transactions, right? I suppose the share prices, the insurance sector, and everything else, the total economy. How much is it?
Well, the South African economy, as economists measure it, we measure it over a period of time. So if you measure it over a 12-month period, the South African economy is just about 3 trillion rands. And the South African banking sector is just over 10 trillion rands. So it's the size of the financial sector is bigger than that of the economy. And that happens in any sophisticated and modern economy because a financial sector is at the heart of the modern economy. You can compare it like the heart of a mammal that distributes blood through the body. The financial sector plays that role, that it moves money from the savers to the borrowers, and borrowers repay, and that is the role of the financial sector, and we call that intermediation.
Right, and of course the so-called real economy, the productive side of the economy, needs the cash, needs the flow of money to function.
Well, the money that ends up in the banking sector comes from the real side of the economy.
Yes.
So a sure way to have a financial sector in trouble is an economy that is in trouble. And as we have seen from the global financial crisis of 2008, in that crisis was long and protracted, and the reason was that the slowdown in the economy started in the financial sector.
Yeah.
So you could almost, as I had talked about, the heart of a mammal being so important. So when the financial sector stopped functioning in 2008 in the advanced economies, the global economy then slumped. But at the heart of a functioning financial sector, you actually need a real economic activity.
Sure. And you've been involved in the management of money at Treasury and now at the Reserve Bank. So the flow of the beating of the heart, as you say, and the flow of the blood, which is the money in the system, has always been of interest to you. Why is that? I mean, what has your experience been so far since you started up till this time?
Well, my very first job was actually in banking. I was a banking clerk, and but I had studied economics, accounting, and finance, and I developed an interest in the field, and it was actually a fascinating field because, as I said, even the economic activity that takes place in the real sector, the money ends up with the financial sector. But what actually got me to be in the public sector and focusing on finance was a fairly interesting development. I was actually minding my business as an accountant, and I got this call that said that, listen, we think that we can have enough accountants. We need economists. We see you have majored in both accounting and economics. And that call had come from Trevor Manuel. And so I then moved into economics, and I never looked back since then. And got to understand, because at the heart of economics is choice. And society needs to understand that its needs and wants are unlimited, but the means to meet those needs and wants are constrained. And that is at the heart of the scarcity problem in economics. And what as economists, we spend most of our time doing is to evaluate different choices that society would like to make, and whether those choices that the society wants to make is sustainable, because the resources to meet those needs and wants are limited.
And do you think that politicians understand this, or people who work in the public sector? I'm not being facetious here, but from your own experience, do you think it would have helped if there was that understanding from ordinary citizens up to the leaders in our society?
We could break it into three categories, really. When you are in the treasury, it is your job to frame those choices that society has to make. It is your job to say what is sustainable and what is not sustainable. A budget process has to be taken through cabinet. So when those trade-offs have been made and the Minister of Finance tables a budget, those are the choices that society makes. So as far as I am concerned, they need to have understood it. Otherwise, they wouldn't have approved that it gets tabled in Parliament. However, when it comes to the broader society, there is a lot of education that we need to do. People have to be engaged with the choices that society has to make. And in making those choices, I think that it is important that we are honest to our people to say there is no country with unlimited resources. Even the richest countries have got a resource constraint. And we need to have that conversation with society when we make choices to say there are trade-offs to be made, and these trade-offs get constrained by the resources that a country has.
All right. Well, you feel also very strongly about your role, and this is what you told Parliament since I brought Parliament into our discussion here recently when the bank was coming under attack, and you as governor, you were also being criticized. This is what you told Parliament.
We felt duty-bound by the Constitution that when we felt that we are under attack, that we've got to stand up and defend this important institution of our democracy. It becomes so because granting institutions independence in terms of the Constitution is one thing. The most important is to put people in those institutions who will understand their mandate and execute it without fear, favor, or prejudice. And so at some stage, people have been asked, if this mandate gets changed, would you resign? And says, why would I resign? Then I would have failed to act without fear or favor. I would have had to engage and protect the independence of the institution.
That's how strongly you feel about this. But I would argue that we don't have enough of such people who understand their mandate and are executing it without fear or favor. What's your impression of what you see?
I can say without any fear of contradiction that the men and women in the Reserve Bank are driven by one thing and one thing only: to execute the mandate that the people of South Africa have tasked them with. And for that, when our people walk in and day out, we know that our people are committed to the institution. There are other institutions that I would name. I've got no doubt that the Office of the Auditor General pursues its mandate without fear or favor. We have seen it with the Independent Electoral Commission. We have seen it with the Public Protector. We have seen it with the judiciary. And what has been a strength, a key strength of our democracy, have been institutions that work. And it is for that reason that when these institutions are under attack, when there is a threat to these institutions, that as South Africans, we need to understand that these are institutions that had been built to protect our democracy. And an attack on those institutions is an attack on our democracy.
But here's the point then, Governor. I mean, the delivery of government services, right, happens mostly at local level, at municipal level. And then we hear from the Auditor General, the office of the, you've mentioned the Auditor General, as well as the Department of Cooperative Governance, that up to 93% of municipalities are not up to scratch. It's only 7% that seem to be performing at optimum level. What do you think? I mean, how does that make you feel, and what do you see, or what do you think when you hear that statement?
You know, I normally, when I speak to Minister Mkhize, whom I had an opportunity and a privilege to engage with a couple of times, I talk to him about what the bank does and what the bank is supposed to be doing. I don't attempt to tell him what municipalities must do. That is his preserve, and I would rather not comment about it.
Well, it actually brings me to the point of municipalities, what they have done recently, taking money and investing it in the VBS Bank, which has now become your matter, right? What actually went wrong at the bank, and what is it that municipalities were supposed to do that they did not do?
A number of things. Firstly, the Municipal Finance Management Act spells out that municipalities should place their accounts and their deposits with registered commercial banks. It specifically excludes mutual banks. And there is a reason why it excludes mutual banks. The regulatory framework for commercial banks is much more robust. It requires a lot more capital than the regulatory framework for a mutual bank. To start a mutual bank, you just need capital of 10 million. To start a commercial bank, you need capital of 250 million. And you must still, and that is not just what, that is the minimum capital that you actually need. What has happened here was that municipalities placed deposits with a mutual bank, in this case, a VBS. The Treasury picked it up. It was also brought to our attention because our focus as prudential regulators is this institution having enough capital, is it having enough liquidity, and so forth. And the Treasury said to the municipalities, this should not be happening. You should be taking the money. You are in breach of the law. That is what the Treasury had to say. What the bank actually did, that is the VBS, was they took these municipal deposits to the extent of about 101.5 billion rands. Now, if you understand, municipalities have got to spend their budgets by the 30th of June. What that meant was that that money must be available to the municipalities by the 30th of June. But what the bank had done was to lend the money long-term, beyond 1 year. What that meant was that when the municipalities wanted their money was not there. The Treasury got alerted because one of the municipalities wrote a letter to the Treasury and says, can you help us get money from VBS? Yeah. So that is what you had seen. But you also seen a collapse of governance in VBS, which is why we ended up instituting a forensic investigation, and we will also have an inquiry into what actually led to those lapses in VBS. Bottom line is that the municipalities are unlikely to recover the full deposits that they had placed with VBS.
And that's exactly why I ask you the question about municipalities, Governor, that you see, when that happens, somebody will have to make up for that shortfall. My guest is the Governor of the Reserve Bank, Mr. Lesetja Kganyago. Will be continuing about VBS, talking about the VAT increase, the fuel increase and foodstuff increase, and other related matters, including the regulatory environment for financial institutions in South Africa. Remember, to be part of our conversation, use the hashtag, the Modise Network.